How's it going, Starseekers? My name's Gotcake and welcome to Star or Shovelware. Today we're going to be taking a look at Dread Nautical, a tactical turn-based RPG where you take control of a bunch of survivors and have to fight your way through the decks of a cruise liner called Hope, which has been overrun with supernatural enemies. So the game opens with a cutscene depicting the cruise liner sailing through the Atlantic, its crew as happy as can be, sunbathing and gambling, when all of a sudden chaos ensues and the ship is pulled from its own reality into another much darker one. Beginning at the main menu, we've got a couple of menus we can navigate. The options menu has a few things to play about with, including in-game settings, where we can toggle tutorials and the action camera which occasionally occurs upon killing enemies, audio settings to adjust the volume and subtitles, video options where we can rescale the AI and turn on motion blur, and controls where we can adjust sensitivity, rumble and button layouts. Back at the main menu, the extras menu lets us view the game's credits, rewatch cutscenes, see tutorial hints and look at the monster codex, which I'll cover shortly. We can then start a new game, where we first pick an available save slot and then select a difficulty. Your choice of difficulty affects the impact dying has on your carried items and teammates, and when you die on insane mode you lose everything. So if it's your first time playing, I'd advise to do as I did and begin on normal difficulty. Next we get to select our main character, and there are 4 to choose from. Each has slight variations in terms of health, action points and inventory space, and each character has 3 unique abilities, 2 of these being active and 1 passive. Active abilities can be skills which damage enemies, buff teammates, or crowd control skills which stun enemies, or passives can provide things like bonuses with certain weapons, or slight healing to team members after each battle. So after picking our character we get a loading screen which displays some indecipherable runes before seeing our character wake up in some sort of safe house. Here we get to meet Jed, a rather peculiar chap who has baguettes for arms. Jed tells us that he found us and brought us back here after the passengers went a bit mental and started attacking each other. He also speaks of zombie-like creatures, and our character is pretty keen to see it for herself.
I've got to see this for myself.
So we set off with Jed's advice to use the radio on the bridge to call for help. We head up to the next floor in the elevator, grabbing a lead pipe as we go. Entering this first deck we get a new objective to scavenge, which is something you're going to be doing a lot as you play through the game. Searchable locations are indicated by gold sparklies rising from them, and they can contain weapons, items, scraps, food or runes. They can also contain key items or tome pages which decipher the symbols found on the game's loading screen. Now the game has 2 phases. Firstly there's the exploration phase where we can move around freely directing our character to tiles with the in-game cursor. Doors separate rooms and you won't know what the room contains until you open it. In this instance we encounter our first enemy and thus begins the game's combat phase. In combat you expend action points or AP to move and perform actions such as attacking, healing and special abilities. Combat rounds are turn based, and once all your AP is spent on all of your characters, your turn is ended and the enemy gets their turn. You can also manually end your turn by holding down the B button in the Switch version of the game, and this is something that you'll also be doing quite often. So each time an enemy is killed it'll drop loot. Like searchable locations, these contain an assortment of pickups. Now sometimes when you enter a room there may be enemies, but they may not yet be aware of your presence. A dark arrow beneath the enemy shows the direction it's facing, and this gives you the opportunity to approach the enemy from behind and initiate a sneak attack, which causes increased damage. You can also cause increased damage by flanking an enemy and attacking it from the side. So after working our way through the first deck, we reach the bridge, and upon finding the radio inoperable, we sound the foghorn and fall unconscious. As day 2 begins, we awake once more in the safe house, where we speak to old Bread Arms again, who is surprised to hear that we remember sounding the horn. It seems that we've repeated this process countless times up to this point, and we've forgotten. Jed then tells us to build a crafting station using scraps, which can then be used to improve and repair weapons and armour. You can also scrap any unwanted items. We can also use scraps to level up the crafting station. Equipment that you scavenge starts at level 1, and the crafting station's level determines how many times we can level up our equipment. This also costs scraps, and it increases the damage and durability of weapons, and defense and durability of armour. And higher level equipment costs more scraps to repair. You can lower the number of scraps you want to use for a repair, but this increases the chance that the equipment will be permanently destroyed. Now in the game there are a lot of different weapons at your disposal, most of which are found through scavenging. Each weapon stat includes damage, range and critical strike chance, AP cost with each weapon's AP displayed as diamonds next to them on your equipment bar at the bottom of the screen. The durability of a weapon is also shown below the weapon's icon, and this indicates how many times it can be used before it breaks and needs repairing. Finally, the noise rating affects a weapon's chance of attracting nearby enemies when you attack with it. Weapons such as knives are silent, whilst firearms are loud. Now, weapons come in different rarities. These include common, uncommon, rare, ultra rare, and cursed. Rarer weapons are usually more powerful, and some weapons come with special attributes such as knockback, critical strike bonus, or increased sneak attack damage. The melee weapon categories are bladed, blunt and piercing, and each enemy usually has a weakness to some type of damage. Through defeating enemies, information on the stats, resistances and vulnerabilities are recorded in the codex found within the pause menu. This helps with strategizing the best way to defeat enemies. The game also features range weapons, which mainly consists of different types of firearms. These allow you to deal damage at a distance, and they can also be fired past team members or over furniture such as tables. Thrown weapons in the game include things like Molotov cocktails, which light enemies on fire in an area, or these strange hearts which poison enemies. Now, your character can also wear one piece of armour or a trinket, and armours decrease the amount of damage you take and have durability, which decreases each time that you're attacked, and accessories usually provide bonus stats but no damage reduction. The final type of item is consumables, and these consist of healing items like bandages and medkits which recover some HP, or potions which provide a variety of effects. So as you explore the ship's decks, you'll encounter several different survivors. You can speak with them to learn a bit about the situation and get to select a response from 4 different available options. Your choice can improve or decrease the relationship with you, and when it's high enough they might even request to join your team. Survivors will also sometimes give you items or objectives to complete. Here for instance, Mel gives us a crowbar and tasks us with collecting some scraps and dissecting a corrupted growth with a crowbar so she can make us some traps. Survivors will also fight against enemies in levels even before you recruit them, and can even die whilst doing so, though they'll respawn on another deck. So following your first encounter with survivors, Bread Arms will tell you to make a bed, allowing you to recruit survivors to your team. Your maximum number of recruitable survivors is determined by your bed's level, which can be upgraded with scraps. And if you don't have enough beds, you can replace one survivor for another, or reject a survivor's request to join you, which will negatively affect your relationship with them. Once recruited, you can take survivors out on missions with you. They can be equipped with weapons and armour, and each comes with their own abilities, such as Mel's ability to plant mines. There is a 3 survivor limit on decks, and after completing a deck, all recruited survivors consume food, regardless of whether they're on the mission or not. If you don't have enough food, or do but decide not to feed them, then they'll become hungry, resulting in health loss and stat reduction. Later in the game, survivors also get stressed after completing a deck, which also reduces their health and stats. Building a medical station allows you to craft medical supplies and items to reduce survivors' stress, with higher levels of this station unlocking better items. When a survivor is resting and recovering from stress, you'll be unable to take them out onto the decks. You'll eventually be able to build the occultist station, where you can spend marks you collect from enemies to increase your character's stats such as HP, weapon damage, defense and ability strength. Each skill you improve increases your character level by 1, and I'd advise investing in AP and inventory space first, as salvaging more items means more scrap for crafting and upgrading weapons and armour. Each upgrade of the occultist station allows you to level up your character an extra 2 times, and once your character reaches level 5, the second ability will be unlocked. So Dread Nautical's gameplay loop sees you exploring each floor of the ship, killing enemies, recruiting survivors, salvaging scrap and items, and levelling up your character and equipment. Every time you visit a deck, it's randomly generated, which adds variety and replayability to the game. As you start to climb up through the decks, you'll begin to encounter more powerful monsters, and in some levels you'll encounter optional sub-bosses, which are harder than normal enemies and usually drop better items. After every 5 levels you encounter a main boss, which you'll have to defeat before you can progress to the next deck. and when you defeat the second boss and reach deck 11 you'll acquire the Danger Rune. This rune forces you to clear decks faster, as from then on as you kill enemies, the Danger Rune's corners will slowly fill, and once all 4 corners are filled it'll change colour. Each level of danger makes clearing a deck more difficult by adding additional dangers such as increased enemy awareness, or spawning enemies around you every so often. In these latter levels, the door to the bridge will sometimes be locked, so you need to find the keycard to open it and sound the foghorn before the Danger Rune glows red. So when it comes to my gameplay experience with Dread Nautical, for the most part I enjoyed the game. The gameplay loop itself wasn't bad, I enjoyed the looting and upgrade system, and enemy variety was decent, though several were just reskin variants of the same enemy. What I really liked was the Lovecraftian vibe the game's visuals give off, and the way in which the game's rooms transform, becoming more corrupted as you progress through the game, though I have to say I did experience several frame rate reductions whilst playing, even in docked mode. Now the game is described as having roguelike elements, but I'm not exactly sure what these were. To me the gameplay of Dread Nautical bore a closer resemblance to games like XCOM rather than any other roguelike game I've played. I played the game on normal difficulty though, where if you died you just returned to the start of the day with the same HP, so maybe harder difficulties provide more of a roguelike experience. So let's talk about the issues I had with the game. To begin with, I did encounter a few issues with movement in the game. A few times the cursor bugged out, and it wouldn't allow me to click on a certain tile. And secondly, I accidentally Molotov my own team several times when I forgot to change weapons before trying to move. Yeah, I know I should have been paying more attention, but I guarantee you'll do it at least once if you play the game, as it's an easy mistake to make. I found inventory space in the game was a big issue in the early decks. Medical items like bandages and medkits don't stack, and it often meant that more scavenged items were left behind, and weapons with low durability were rarely used. You also can't carry extra armour you find, which stops you from salvaging spare armour for new survivors. When it comes to combat, while it was enjoyable, I was still a little disappointed. The AI of enemies wasn't great, and it was just too easy to exploit. To give you a couple of examples, in this first clip, the Spitter, which is a ranged enemy, just walks in through the doorway and engages in close combat. When it comes to the roller and charger enemies, once they target a survivor, and if it's behind an object such as a wall or table, they'll just stand still, even if there are survivors much closer to them. And this problem extends to the bosses and sub-bosses in the game, with this behemoth sub-boss walking straight through the Molotov fire, and the gargantuan roller just sitting there in the fire letting me shoot it across the garden. One major issue with the combat was the ambush rooms. These basically lock you in a room until you've defeated all the enemies, and sometimes they trigger as soon as your first survivor enters the room, which is basically game over if this happens to be your main character. If you're playing the game on normal, then that just means you have to restart the day again, but anything higher and the outcome's much worse. One final thing I found was that the hunger and stress mechanics didn't really add much to the game. I felt that I often wasn't able to find enough food in levels through general gameplay to cope with more than 3 survivors. So when they became stressed, I just starved and rested them, whilst I cleared deck 1 a couple of times on my own, before feeding them back up to full health. So now we come to rating the game. Now I rate games between 1 and 5 stars, with a should stamp of approval reserved for the worst games on the eShop. This rating's based on my own personal opinion on what a game has to offer in terms of gameplay, and value for money for potential buyers. And for a rating I'd give Dread Nautical 3 out of 5 stars. The general gameplay and mechanics of the game are quite fun, but I'd advise playing on hard mode if you want more of a challenge, as the enemy AI alone doesn't present enough of one. You can get the game from the UK Switch eStore for £17.99, or from the US eStore for $19.99. The game's also available on Xbox One and PlayStation 4. And that's it for this review of Dread Nautical. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments section below. As always, hit that like button if it helped you out, and consider subscribing for future Switch indie game reviews. For now though, I want to thank you all once again for watching, and until next time, game on.